Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healer specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
I'm doing exceptionally well. Thanks for asking, Rory. Rory and I both hope that you are doing well. You've joined Ken and Rory on the Counselling Tutor Podcast. It's episode 270. It's actually a celebratory episode today because today's episode marks an ending, marks a number of endings, Rory, I think, and we'll talk about that in a little while, but it'll be no surprise to our regular listeners that we're going to weave that into today's theme. So in theory and practice today, we're going to be speaking about processing endings with our clients. We then go on to practice today, where we're going to be looking at should we be looking up our clients on social media and just basic social media management around our clients. And then in practice matters today, that is the CPD section, we're going to be speaking about pet bereavement. So let's kick ourselves off with that theory and practice, Rory, as we recognise the ending of the academic year, certainly here in the UK. But not only that, I think we also recognise the end of what has been a 5-year mission for Counselling Tutor. We come to the end of that, and we'll be picking up with a brand new mission when we join everybody again in early September, if you're listening in real time, of 2023, with a brand new mission. Endings, Rory.
Endings, absolutely. And this has been brought really to my attention by lots of people in our Facebook group. And if you're not a member of our Facebook group, put Counselling Tutor into Facebook, you'll find us, just click on and we'll let you in. And you would see lots and lots and lots of people, saying, I've come to the end of my course. It's, I've finished my mission to become a therapist. And it's sometimes, in my experience, quite a difficult ending to process because, I will speak for myself here, but becoming a counsellor, trained to be a counsellor, is one of the 4 defining elements in my life. There were pivot points in my life that took me into a different direction, that made me think differently, that made me behave differently. And, one of the things is that with groups, there can be a tendency to think the group will go on forever. We've been together for 2 years or 3 years, and we'll always be together, we'll always be friends. And it's a little bit like trying to capture lightning in a bottle.
Oh, I like that.
You cannot do it twice. It's looking for a world. Sometimes it's looking for a world that's been and gone. And it can be quite a difficult one to process, I think, the ending of a group. I know some groups are not as, shall we say, as enjoyable as others. But for those people who've been in a really good group with a really good tutor and have really, celebrated their growth, it can be very, very, very hard to try and let that go and try and replicate it again, because in my experience, you can't. Once you've done it, it's done.
Yeah. And I want to acknowledge that, we speak about endings in counselling, and there's a whole topic, and we've done a number of different episodes on endings, so how we would work with our clients on endings, and we'll pop those into the links of today's show notes if you want to go and visit endings related to counseling. But today is more about endings within yourself. How do you process the endings? And we can look at endings in various ways. You know, if you're a student and maybe you've just finished a level 3 certification course and you're going on to a level 4 in the next academic year, that in itself is an ending. It's the ending of the level 3. Although you are continuing on your journey, think of it like a book, that a book would have chapters and each chapter would end. And I guess the next chapter needs an ending before it can begin again. And of course, there's bigger endings. We might then come to the end, as you have said, Rory, of your studies. You might be graduating. You might be finishing your degree. You might be finishing your master's. It's coming to an end, and it can bring with it a celebration. Yes, I've done it, completed my studies, but it also brings with it that paradox, the other side of it, the side of, well, I'm leaving this group. I'm leaving the tutor environment. I'm leaving I guess the umbrella of my academic support, my peer support that I've grown to recognize and use. But it is, I guess, in a way, the start of a new chapter. And I don't want to reduce the ending by keeping on pointing to the new chapter. But I think today is about looking at what endings mean for you, what goes on inside you. And I think if we look at humanity in general, we tend, and this is from my vantage point, so this is not based on any research that I've read, we tend to kind of want to cling on. We tend to not want there to be an ending. And an example of that might be a group coming to an end of, let's say, a level 3 coming to an end, and then the members of the group on that last session go, but we're all going to get together soon, and we'll keep in touch, and we'll keep in touch on social media. And there's almost a grasping to hold on to that was so special, that was so meaningful. And well-meaning intentions as one leaves that room. But it may play out that either it never happens, or it slowly drifts away over time, and it becomes this long drawn-out ending, as opposed to that's it. And I remember my last day of my counselling training. We were done. I left the group that I'd spent many years with. I left my tutor. I left the support of that environment, which I really grew and loved during my process. But I was okay with that. I prepared myself for it, that as I was leaving that group, I was leaving for the final time. I was done. I needed to finish that chapter, and the excitement within me was on where I was going next. But it wasn't like that for everybody. For others, it was more tricky.
Yeah, it's about individual experiences, isn't it? And I'm reminded of Søren Kierkegaard, who's a philosopher, who said, life has to be lived forward but viewed backward. And the idea that, we acknowledge what's gone in the past, but our future is ahead of us. It's forward of us, and we must move into that. But you are right about people yearning for what's gone. I mean, as a proud Mancunian and an Oasis fan, I yearn for the day when they reform and I could go and see them again. It won't happen, but it is about processing endings. And I also think that unless one kind of has the right mindset, it can really impact on your next part of your journey. And I remember when I moved from my certificate year to my diploma year, I went into the room and I didn't know who was going to be there. And I think there's only one or two people from my certificate. The rest were new people. And the tutor made a clear statement at the beginning that this was a new group, that this was a new journey, this was a new direction, and what's been and gone had gone. We were moving forward, and I think that I like you, Ken, was okay with that. But I think that for some, they yearn to try and catch that lightning in a bottle. They yearn for what has been, and it was quite interesting. In all the groups that I've been, long-term groups, they've all said the same thing. We'll get in contact and we'll go out regularly and we'll meet up. And that might happen on one occasion. And after that, people just drift away. It just happens. People just drift away. They move into their own lives. and their lives change. And I think that's the right passage of life. I think that's how lives are lived. They live forward, as Søren Kierkegaard so aptly reminds us.
Yeah, very much so. And I guess in reflecting on what you're speaking about there, Rory, I think that what we're not saying is that there's a slamming of the book. Well, that's the end. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Never going to see you again. Never going to hear from you again. So more than a decade after my studies, there are still some of the people that accompanied me on that journey, or I accompanied them on that journey, that were in my group, that I'm still in contact with. And perhaps you're also along the way creating professional relationships with peers that you might refer to, or that you might meet up with to kind of have a professional peer discussion on things that are going on for you. So what ends is the group as it was. And I think you pointed to it very nicely there, Rory. An example of this is moving from a level 3 to a level 4, or from a level 4 up into a higher level. And maybe one or two members of that group may leave and another two people come in. It's not the same group with another two people in. It's a completely different group. It's not the same group with two people that are no longer there. It's a completely different group. And I think when we hang on to how it used to be, it kind of stifles our own ability to process and be in the group as it is. There's almost an attachment, Rory, backwards to, well, it used to be like this. And you know, that's something that we see through the arc of life. I think it's Erik Erikson's developmental model kind of indicates that we eventually get to a part of our lives where we look back and it's all about how it used to be, and it's not like that anymore, and we kind of look back and think about that. But we're speaking about endings of how do you process that? What do you do with it? Where do you go with that? Do you find endings easy? Do you find endings difficult? Do you want to hold on? Do you think back? What does it mean to you? And so, Rory, what might we do when we're coming to an ending? So we would hopefully, I guess, have information that the ending is coming. So whatever kind of ending that is, I mean, we do experience sudden endings in our life that can be quite tragic. It may be the death of a pet, which kind of links into something we're going to be speaking in the CPD section today, bereavement of a pet. We can lose that. That can be very sudden. It can be unexpected. But we would hope that within an environment of counselling and training, or working in an agency and maybe leaving to go to another agency or into private practice, there would be a process leading up to that, as opposed to a bang, it is that day there. So, Rory, what's some things we can do in the process leading up to an ending? And maybe if we find ourselves in a little bit of difficulty or clinging back after an ending, and is it really unhealthy if we're looking back, or is it nostalgic?
Well, yes. I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head there with the use of the word healthy, and that would be what's healthy for the individual. You know, I think that some people like yourself, you know, we're okay with endings, and it was just a case of, I'm going forward now, new beginning in my life. That's fine. Some people may yearn, if you like, for what's been and gone. And it depends how it impacts on your life. If it negatively impacts in that you can't move forward, if you're in a new group and you're just thinking totally of, you know, I wish I was in this other group's better. Maybe that's one to process in your own therapy. If you're a student, maybe it's one to process in your own therapy, because almost certainly I would imagine that that's linking into other losses, maybe losses that haven't been processed previously. They're just kind of hanging around. And also think, you know, some type of clean thoughtfulness is useful, clarity, and thinking about, you know, what you liked and you enjoyed, and you can keep as a memory of that experience, that group. Maybe being honest about what didn't work so well. You know, not all relationships are, you know, darkness and light to some extent, and there might have been some difficult patches. But also thinking about the future, what the future is going to look like. You know, how are you going to take that experience and that growth of it, your growth as a person, and how are you going to move that into the new environment, and also giving people a chance. You know, because you meet these new people, you got to give them a chance, haven't you, to form a new group. And I always used to say that when I was a tutor. I said, you know, I used to say when people came in and they'd sit down, you could see they were a little nervous. I'd say, I think we have to acknowledge this is a new group. You've come from different groups, and I think we need to give people a chance to know each other, and it might be a slow process, but eventually you'll become a group again. And I think that's useful. And groups go through stages. I mean, there's a Tuckman model of norming, forming, storming, norming, and performing and reforming. But there's also a part of that model that's called mourning, where people will mourn for what's been and gone. So I think it's a process, active process to engage with. And of course, at the end of studies, there can be lots of different losses. There can be people move on from their placements. People may change their job.
Yes.
That all that happened to me pretty quickly. I finished my studies. I changed my job. I changed my practice just a little bit, and there were personal changes in my life as well. It was a huge amount of change, and eventually it all ended up okay, I think. But just embrace the fact that it can be uncomfortable. I think, don't run away from that.
I think that is a great point, Rory. It can be uncomfortable, and in welcoming that discomfort, in journaling, in sitting and processing that, in speaking with a peer, or perhaps a trusted friend, because if you're speaking about an ending like this, it's not necessarily a confidential relationship that you can't speak of and share with friends or family. Look at what your support system looks like, and learn from that and grow from that. Endings are about personal development, I think, in terms of how we handle, approach, and see endings. It's all lies within us, because endings happen every day in many, many different ways all around us. And as kind of previously stated, some can be sudden, some can be welcomed when something's going on and on and on. you've been on with the service provider, with the bills that are wrong for months now, and eventually that comes to an end. There's a celebration of, I'm so glad that's over, and other ones where there is that mourning, as you've just mentioned, Rory. How do we work with that? How do we deal with that? If you're in practice, you can, of course, take elements to your supervisor. If you find that it's impacting your here and now experience in your new role or your new placement, as it may be, there's a lot to do there. And one of the things that I find that is useful for me in dealing with endings, and it parallels the counselling process, Rory, and I'm not talking about counselling endings now, I'm talking about endings that come up in my life, when I know that they're coming, when they are planned, is I keep on revisiting the ending is coming. The ending is coming. I might verbalize that. So, for example, if I was within a group and we were doing some CPD training and that went on for a few months and we were nearing the end of that and it was in the last few weeks, I would maybe say, wow, I cannot believe that we've spent all this time together and there's only a couple of weeks left, and then we're kind of going to be parting and saying our goodbyes. And this is maybe something we would say in therapy to a client to prepare them for the end. But in this case, I'm doing it for myself. I'm verbalizing it for myself. And of course, in that kind of a situation, you may get the response of, yeah, but we're all going to keep in touch and we're all going to be together. And you see how that ending is going to be reflected in somebody else. And then I might respond to that and say, I get that. And I'd love to keep in contact with you, but I'm just acknowledging the ending of this process that we're going through. And I think by just speaking it, for me, I find that really, really, really useful, verbalizing it coming again and again.
Absolutely, Ken. Acknowledging it to yourself, being realistic about it, and while also embracing what the next step is. And also, I think graduations are a great way of processing an end. I've been to many graduations. I didn't go to my own because we didn't have a graduation for my counselling course. So we just fired off out the end of the cannon. That was it. We just went. But I personally was okay with that. I process endings by just disappearing, going off into the future. I'm not a very wistful person, but a celebration of success. And I think graduations are a great place to do that. I've been honoured enough to be at graduation ceremonies, as you have, Ken, for our students, and it's wonderful for them to acknowledge the end of one part of their life in front of their family, their peers. And in fact, when we used to go to graduations and kind of be part of that process, in front of a wider group. And I think it puts an underline underneath that journey. It's like, I have my certificate, I'm wearing my cap and my gown, underline, tick. that is that part done. And I think that's why graduations exist, if I'm honest. There's a lot of people during the lockdown who lamented the fact they didn't have a graduation. For that reason, it wasn't a satisfactory ending.
Yeah, it doesn't give you that full stop at the end of the sentence, does it?
No.
That we expect to see there. And of course, there are also other techniques you can use. You can give a gift or a poem or a letter, or speak to people and tell them what they meant to you along this journey. And certainly within my group, when we were graduating, we were all kind of went away and thought of a song that we wanted to share with everyone that reminded us of this journey. And then one of our peers went away and burnt those to a CD. Back in the days of CDs, Rory.
I've still got mine.
Yeah, me too. I can still play my CD. And if I listen to that CD, that gives me that opportunity to be transported back and remember who submitted that song and why. And I remember we spent a full session of everybody playing their song, saying why they dedicated it to this group. It was beautiful. There was many, many tears. There was lots of laughter. But it did what the graduation does. It put a full stop in. The graduation was the icing on the cake for that. So there was a technique tied into the ending, which made it rather special, I have to say, Rory.
I remember with great fondness the ending of your cohort, because I obviously, we acknowledged that I was your tutor for a time, and it was I think fair to say a very, very special ending, and indeed, without giving too much away, a very special group. It was a very special group. And it is interesting. I went back to teach when I qualified. I was doing level 2 courses, and I remember going back into the same room that I taught in before the students came in, and sitting in the tutor seat, looking at the circle that I was sat in for 3 years, and it was really strange. It was literally full of ghosts. I could see the people, and I had to go through a process of just wishing them well. Because I realized very early on that if I was looking at a room full of my past, I wasn't really going to be giving my future much of a chance.
Oh, yes. Let's put a bow around this topic of endings by kind of ending it with the fact that this is quite a significant ending for Rory and I. It's the ending of an academic year here in the UK. Our podcast runs during the academic year, so we're at the end of our season. But it's not just the end of the season, it is also the end of a 5-year plan that we had in Counselling Tutor. So when you pick us up in September, in our new academic year, if you're listening in real time, that'll be September 23, it may sound and come across a little bit differently, because why? Well, this chapter is closing and we're looking at a brand new chapter, and we hope that you'll join us for that. We are excited and we're looking forward to what that new chapter will be. And if you want to find out more about that, then make sure you join us in September 23, early September, and you'll hear more about where we are going. And that is today's Theory and Practice at an End. Theory to Practice is proudly sponsored by CounselingSkillsAcademy.com. I'm Ken Kelly, and I've got a real burning passion for counselling skills. I've built training that takes the doubt out of using counselling skills. You get to see the counselling skills used in real live sessions by a qualified therapist. Full sessions, real material, real counselling skills. To find out more, go to CounselingSkillsAcademy.com. And as we move from theory and practice, we go into our practice today, where we look at what is contemporary, what is happening now, and we ask the question, which is becoming more and more relevant. Looking up clients on social media, Rory? Yes, no? In certain circumstances, if we want to find out more, maybe, what do we do here?
Well, it's interesting, and this has been driven by a number of interesting conversations in our Facebook group, and also from professional discussions I've had over the last 18 months. And one particular discussion I had with a colleague who asked me directly and said to me, would you look up a client on social media? And I said, personally, no, I wouldn't. I feel it's right up there with me. When I started, I didn't have any social media, but it'd be right up there with me. When I did my placement, finding the name of address and driving my car and parking outside the house. There's something there's something a bit unnerving about doing that. And we got into a very, very rich, interesting professional discussion about what's the difference between getting a referral from another professional with client's details in and looking someone up on social media. And I said, well, the first thing is that, clients have a right to a private life. In fact, I think that might be enshrined in the European Human Rights Charter, allowed to have privacy. And certainly data protection asks and speaks to privacy as well. And also, I think that when you get a referral, when another professional is referring you, they will be working to what's called the Caldecott principle. So here in the UK, there is a protocol called the Caldecott principles. And those principles are that when you share information, you share only that is relevant to the referral. And everybody knows their place in terms of how that information is used and I guess stored and acknowledged. And the client would know that a referral was being made. So the client has autonomy, and that is something that appears in ethical and professional frameworks, no matter which professional body you're with. And I also think that there's another added danger to looking clients up on social media. Imagine this scenario. I'm sat as a client in the therapy chair, and my therapist says to me, how are things? And I say, well, things aren't going very well with my sister, Doris. Things aren't going very well with my sister. And my therapist says, oh, that's your sister, Doris, isn't it? And I think to myself, I never told my therapist I had a sister called Doris. And the thing is, you cannot unlearn what you've learned. Once you've seen something, you cannot unlearn it. And I think this speaks to the fact that when we're stuck now in contemporary society, we use the internet to find out. We just do. I mean, I drive my car. If I'm looking for directions, I just say, "Hey Siri, direct me to," and the AI gives me the direction to go. It's a natural reaction, and I think that sometimes happens with therapists. They look up their clients because they're stuck. And for me, the correct direction is, if you're going down that route, ask yourself why, ask yourself what you need to know, and then consider taking that to supervision. My personal view, I don't think it's a great idea to look up people on social media. And I do know people have come unstuck by doing it.
Yeah. And there are certain social media platforms that also give you a report of who's looking at your profile. LinkedIn being one of those.
Yeah.
And that LinkedIn is a social platform. I know that it's considered that it's work, but it acts as a social platform where people are speaking and having open discussions that can be seen and monitored by others. So just looking at this, when I was doing my research for this, I found something really interesting. It's the APA in the United States for psychologists, and they speak a lot about social media and how it can be used and what the dangers may be. And this I really like. Respect client privacy and confidentiality. Now, if I say that, there's not a counselor out there, there's not a psychotherapist out there that is not nodding their head and going, yeah, respect client privacy and confidentiality. We follow that with in all settings. Including an online setting. I would go as far as to say, from my point of view on this, and remember we say this often, Rory and I are not the experts here. We're not saying this. We are the undisputed experts on this. As two peers having a conversation. So no complaint letters in the bag, please. From my point of view, I believe it is unethical. I think it is a breach of ethics. I think it's like driving up to somebody's house, sitting outside their house and watching the comings and goings without them knowing you're doing it. It just sits so incredibly wrong with me that we would watch somebody without their permission, without them knowing about it, and gleaning information from that information that the client didn't bring us in the therapy room. Why? If I was supervising a counselor who said that, I would be saying, what are you hoping to gain from that interaction. There's nothing there for us. Now, there's another side of this, Rory, because a client, of course, may find us on social media. If you're on social media, excuse me, and I know there are many that choose not to go on social media to avoid this difficulty. But if you know somebody's name and you have a will, chances are you may be able to find something about them on the internet or on social media. What happens if a client finds you as the therapist and you've been seeing this client for some time and all of a sudden you see a friend request from someone who is a client? And that is a tricky situation, and that is why it is advised that you create a social media policy. If you are a practitioner working specifically in private practice, you'll have your policies, you'll have your procedures. A social media policy is so useful. It's so useful to kind of outline how you work with social media and what you do not do. And you might mention in that you do not accept friend requests, and you might indicate why you don't accept those friend requests. And then just as a tip on that, so if you don't have a policy in place, or even if you do have a policy in place and you as the counsellor do receive a friend request from a client that you're actively seeking, it's not best practice to reject that friend request. It's better to leave it there. Do not accept it. Leave it there. Wait until you next see the client and have a chat about them and speak about it in the room. Because again, we can send the signal of negativity, of rejection by I sent a friend request and now the friend, not even my counselor wants to be my friend kind of message. And I say that as it may be received that way. And of course, that would not be our intention. And Rory, when you were saying, earlier about the laws, so you spoke about the Human Rights Act. There's something in that, when we are working on lines, we have to consider the potential legal implications of our online activities. We have to think about that. And wherever you're listening to this, what are the legal considerations around this, around use of social media with somebody that you share a confidential relationship in a confidential setting with? There's so much to consider here. And I guess this is separate from using social media as a way to find clients. That's a whole different discussion. This is about looking at clients, or clients maybe potentially looking at you and wanting to befriend you, Rory.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with all the steps you've outlined there, should a client make a friend request to you. But also, I think with what I'm going to term from now on therapeutic voyeurism, where someone is being a voyeur, someone who's vicariously getting a thrill out of observing other people's behavior, sometimes when they don't know, is that it can create a very, very unhealthy dynamic. What happens if your client is telling you something and you look them up on social media and you find out that what they are telling you isn't true? How are you now going to be able to work with that client? How are you going to do that? Because human beings don't like being lied to. And sometimes clients will have their version of their truth. That's the thing. And you're working with their frame of reference. They have to come to their own truths. I think there's so many dangers of therapeutic voyeurism. And I think it comes down to the fact that, if there's anyone listening, I'm sure the people who listen to our podcast don't do this type of thing. But should you be tempted, I would be tempted in first instance to go to your supervisor and say, look, I'm thinking of looking up my clients on social media. And I've had conversations like that as a supervisor, and I say, thank you for bringing this. Let's see what's going on here. As a supervisor, you should be saying, let's see what's going on here. And usually a skilled supervisor will be able to find out exactly what it is that you're drawn to. And in fact, we touched on this before in episode 254 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. We talked about counselling celebrities, where you may find, inadvertently, that you open the pages of your newspaper or your social media and your client is there as a media personality. So I think it's an issue of our time, and it's one, to be honest, that's not often talked about. I don't hear a lot of people speaking about this, Ken.
Yeah, and it's once again, isn't it? It's looking at what could the potential pitfalls be as we travel along our road of being a therapist and being in practice, working in an agency, in private practice, even in placement. How does that look? And what tends to happen is these things can happen innocently enough. So I'm going to give you an example. You're sat in a session with a client, and I'm going to use again loss of a pet because it kind of ties into a topic we're going to be discussing next in Practice Matters in our CPD section. The client may talk about their pet dog that they had for 15 years that has sadly passed away, and they're bringing that material, and then the client may say, I'd love to show you a picture of Woofles the dog. Tell you what I'll do. I'll just send you a friend request, and then you'll be able to see, and I'll be able to share a picture with you. And of course, that kind of comes up really innocently. There's no malice there. There's no planning to kind of step out, but it can backfire within that moment when, okay, all right, I'll look out for that. And then afterwards thinking about it going, hold on a second. But if we have that social media policy, we know where we stand beforehand. So we're thinking about this before it comes up. And look, I mean, if a client wanted to bring in their picture of Woofles on a phone, and they were accessing their social media account and opening the picture and showing, that's a different ball game. You can that is different because you are not there. That is given with consent. They are in the room. They are the one controlling what they show you, where they show you, and how they show you. Whereas social media, the person looking at social media is determining all of that, which takes, I guess, so much away from the client. We're talking about a confidential, private relationship. And also the other thing is, I mean, what is often put out on social media is selective transparency of a portion of life or a view of life you might want to show to your friends and family. And very often we see the incongruence, where a client may say, everybody thinks that they would love to be me because I've got the ideal job and the ideal home, but inside I'm falling apart, and it's that inside I am feeling. That's what we work with, and that doesn't live on social media. That lives in the therapy room, Rory.
You're absolutely right, and I think we shouldn't sacrifice the freshness of the engagement with our clients. I think that every time we meet our client, that it's a process. It's not an event. It's a process, and when we work with our client, that process should have a freshness about it. It should be a meeting of two people to explore what's going on for one of those people. We don't want anything that clouds, anything that would put a smoke screen in front of us. We need clarity in the way that we work. And if we have difficulties, if we're struggling, if we're unsure, then supervision is the best place to lay that out in front of your supervisor and have a really good look at it, because most of the time it's not really the client stuff, it's yours as a therapist. It really is.
It is. As we kind of bring this topic to an end, have a think about what you can do, have a think about a social media policy, speak to some peers and discuss what might be in that social media policy. Do that on the Facebook group, which in itself is social media, but used for a very different reason. And you'll find that by going onto Facebook, putting in Counselling Tutor. You can come and join us there and join that conversation. That is Practice Today. And we move now into Practice Matters, the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor podcast, where we look for experts in their field to come and share their knowledge and their experience with you. And Rory, you met up with Carrie Kearns speaking about pet bereavement. And this really hit me hard because pet bereavement, losing a pet, can be as hard-hitting and in some instances harder hitting than losing a family member. And that is the reality.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little spoken about part of bereavement work. We're talking about bereavement work, and this area is very seldom spoken about, mainly because there's very few people who speak with authority in this area. I met up with Carrie Kearns, who is an authority in this area, and this is what she had to say.
Practice matters.
So sometimes clients may come to us with specific issues around grief, and a growing number of people are presenting in therapy rooms with grief around the loss of pets, their loved ones, their companions. So I'm delighted to be speaking today with Carrie Kearns, who is a student on a level 5 diploma in counselling. She's soon to be a qualified colleague, but she has expertise in pet bereavement and has taken a keen interest in working with clients or has met people, helping them get through pet bereavement. So Carrie Kearns, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, and I have to say it's unusual for us to interview a student on this part of the podcast because it is usually for qualified practitioners who have an expertise. But I am always reminded that there are those people who are studying who already have a very well-defined skill set in a different area. And yours has been pet bereavement. So just as an introduction, tell us a little bit how you got into pet bereavement. What was your motivation?
Okay, well, basically, I started working in veterinary practice back in '99, and I found, obviously, that there were a lot of clients that would come to us with pets that required euthanasia or had passed away at home or, had been involved in accidents. And understandably, the clients were very upset at the loss of their companions, whether it was an expected loss or a sudden loss. And I just felt that as veterinary professionals, we weren't offering them the support that we could. We were basically sympathising at the time, saying, I'm sorry for your loss, and then give them a leaflet for the Blue Cross and then sent them on their way. And I personally felt that that wasn't enough, that there's still a bit of a stigma around pet loss, and it's still very much like a disenfranchised grief. And so I wanted to make a difference and let clients know that we do take it seriously, that if we as veterinary staff don't get it, how can we expect friends and family of theirs to get it? And so I decided to undertake a diploma in companion animal bereavement counselling. I've done a couple of other certificates regarding pet bereavement since, and now I tutor the CPD for veterinary staff so that they can help their clients further as well.
Yes, and I think you've made it really clear that when you worked as a bereavement counsellor, and as a strong tradition certainly in the UK of people supporting people in grief, that you didn't practice as a counsellor, you just supported people in the loss of their pets, which is a principled work, and should be congratulated. I want to pick up on that little phrase you used, disenfranchised grief. Interesting. Not heard that. What does it mean?
So disenfranchised grief is a term given to a grief that isn't usually accepted by society. And it could be anything, that it's basically society not understanding the reactions to a loss. It could be like pet loss. It could be someone loses their job and people don't understand why someone's so upset, or could be say somebody had like an extramarital affair and they lost the person they're having an affair with, and they're unable to speak about their grief with others because they just don't understand, or it's unaccepted. Pet bereavement definitely, I suppose, falls into the disenfranchised category because a lot of people will still come out with the phrase, "Oh, it's just a pet. You can just get another one." And I just think that it's a loss that is still not quite fully understood by others and doesn't really get the respect that it deserves.
Yes, and I think the key thing for me is respect here, because you're right. If someone, I'm sure those people listening, the listener, wouldn't dream of discounting someone who came with grief with the loss of a pet. But from a society position, there is that. Well, why are you getting upset about the death of a cat or a pet? Or, any other animal. And of course, it can be as real as the death of a living person, I guess. Would I be right on that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think from what I've seen when I've spoken to people is that there's a guilt associated with them having a stronger reaction to the loss of a companion animal than they have to a relative or a friend. And because society has told them that, you should hold humans in higher regard than pets. And so when someone expresses that they feel more grief over losing their dog than they did their grandfather, they feel this guilt because they've been led to believe that they shouldn't be feeling stronger towards the loss of their dog than how could you possibly feel worse for losing an animal than you could for losing a family member? But the bond is completely different. We spend so much time with our pets, we do so much for them. And when we're spending a lot of time with them, sometimes it's like one-to-one, and it's a different bond and it's a deeper bond. And I think that sometimes people have a better relationship with their animals than they do with human, like family members. And personally, I don't think that there's any shame in having a stronger reaction to losing a pet than a family member. We have no idea of that person's family dynamics or relationship with human family members.
Yes, it's a very special relationship, and I've often heard people say, to me, that an animal is non-judgmental. Certainly, dogs, they're non-judgmental. They just treat you as they are. They react to you. Horses, are another animal that they use them as therapy animals, don't they? They're very sensitive animals, and I like the idea that it's a different form of relationship. That one of the things that maybe therapists have to understand is that the relationship between human and animal is a different dynamic than human to human.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, for a lot of people that lose a companion animal, that animal may have been their sole companion. They may not have family around them or friends. And that's something to bear in mind. Also, the fact that this pet may have been the last living link to a relative or a friend that has passed. And so when they lose that companion, they're not only losing their companion animal, they're losing the last living link to a human loved one.
Oh, that's interesting. It's almost like a link to the past, almost. Yeah, that's something I actually hadn't. I'm kind of struck by that. I never considered that there's a lot invested in an animal relationship, and I suppose there's an existential element in that. For people who own pets, I have to say I speak with no expertise on this. I don't own any pets. I'm not a pet type person, but I know friends who and certainly loved ones who've had pets. They invest a lot of themselves into the relationship, and it gives them a meaning. I mean, I've known people who've said I have to get up at 7:00 in the morning, no matter how down I feel, to take my dog for a walk, or feed my dog, or feed the cat, or go and see my horses. And I guess that once the animal has died, then that meaning can disappear, and it can have an effect on the person's well-being.
Yeah, definitely. So for a lot of people, their pets give them a reason for living, give them purpose, give them routine. And when they lose that companion, they're not only having to deal with the physical absence of their companion, but also their routine's completely out of the window. They may find that it increases feelings of isolation. Maybe they went for regular walks with the dogs and they interacted with other people on a regular basis, and it was a social meeting. And now that they don't have their companion, they may think, well, that connection with those people is now lost, or they don't know how they're going to go on that same walk without their dog and meet these same people and talk about what happened. And also there's also like the like a medical aspect to it as well. If you had a companion animal that required a lot of therapy, a lot of medication at regular times, for a long, there's like the caregiver sort of burden where you're having to, your life revolves around your companion and their condition as well. And when you lose that companion, you may still have alarms going off on your phone to give medication to your pet and realise, they're not here. You don't have to do that anymore. And there can almost be, I've found some people have had guilt around feelings of relief that that they don't have to do that anymore. And so that's something else that I've been trying to help people with is coming to terms with it's okay to feel relief that you don't have this pressure anymore. You still miss your companion. Feeling relief doesn't mean that you don't care about them anymore. But again, a lot of people, as I said, that their pets are a source of companionship. They may have got them through some pretty tough times. And especially for those that are physically disabled, that rely on their support animals to help them live a reasonably independent life. That's another aspect when they lose that animal, that not only have they lost their companion, they've also lost that assistance that helped them to have an independent life. And also there's that waiting period between getting a new companion and then having to train them whilst you're still in the depth of your grief.
And I think that's an interesting point, because I was going to ask you about that. Do you get people who, like with human relationships, feel guilty about taking on another pet companion when their original pet companion has died?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of people tend to wonder when is the right time to take on a new companion. A lot of people feel guilt at even the thought of taking on a new companion, and they feel that even considering it is dishonouring the memory of their previous companion. And the way I help people around that is to sort of reframe it and say, well, you have a lot of expertise, you have a lot of love to give, a lot of time. You could give another companion animal a really good life that needs it. And you're not replacing the companion you've lost. You could never replace them. What you're doing is replacing or continuing the normality of having an animal in your life and continuing a bond with a new companion. Just because, for some people, they may leave it months or even years before they consider another companion. Others may literally, as soon as they leave the crematorium, be on the phone or on a website looking for a new companion. And both any time frame is valid. It's up to the individual. The only thing I would say as a word of caution is to make sure that the new companion is just that. A new companion isn't some way of trying to continue the bond with your previous companion. So you'll get, the vets I used to work at would have people coming in with animals that were like named after their previous companion. So we'd have like Mitzi number 2, Mitzi number 3, or as that person's trying to continue that bond. And they would become more upset that this new companion didn't act like their old companion. And they've specifically gone out and got this new one because it looked like their old one, because it acted similar. And when they realise that this new companion is just that, is a completely new individual, that leads to feelings of guilt and upset, because the reason they took on this new companion was because they were trying to continue, they weren't ready to let go of their previous companion.
Yes, and I guess that's a kind of a presentation that we would see, I guess, sometimes with people who have human interactions. They find another partner, and they find that new partner is very, 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 very different, and they try and make that partner fit. And I think for those people who've watched the Netflix series Afterlife, there's a lot of that within that, as someone is grieving and trying to replace someone, and of course people are irreplaceable. I found this absolutely fascinating. I've learned a new word, disenfranchised grief. You've opened my eyes to a completely different area of grief work, and I'm sure the people who are listening may very well have had their eyes open too. So it just goes for me to say, Carrie Kearns, thank you so much for joining us.
Massive thank you to Carrie. Massive thank you to you, Rory, for finding the interesting topics, the little spoken about topics. Yeah, and lots of useful information there. And of course, that brings us to the end of this current season of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. This has been episode 270.
Yes, we start off in theory of practice, processing endings, lots of endings in lots of ways at the end of the academic year, and indeed the end of this season of the podcast. In practice today, we talked about looking up clients on social media and talked about what the dangers and the processes that might play out if therapists want to do that. And finally, we caught up with wonderful Carrie Kearns, who talked about a little spoken about area of bereavement, which is pet bereavement. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counsellor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counsellor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counselor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.